Good evening and welcome to Tysky Sour. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined this evening by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing exquisitely, extraordinarily well, Michael. Thank you for asking.
We have is it very special? Because I mean, it's happened quite a lot now, but we're going to go straight to a Downing Street briefing before me and Aaron give you our analysis. What we're expecting to hear from Boris Johnson, well, we know what we're going to hear from him because he announced it today in Parliament. It's a new tier system to be introduced at the end of this current lockdown. That comes in on the 2nd, or that ends, sorry, on the 2nd of December. So we will have a new tier system coming in. What will be very much of interest is what he says about Christmas. It was briefed over the weekend that we are going to have up to 3 households being allowed to sort of be together for 5 days over Christmas, which will obviously be very good news for people that want to spend Christmas with their friends and family. But the big question is why, when we've got vaccines around the corner, and there was a new vaccine today, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, apologies, that's proven to be fairly effective. Why, when we've got that, that saviour around the corner, are we encouraging people to go and hang out across generations? So you'll have people who are school age, who have the highest prevalence of COVID-19, hanging out with their grandparents. Do we really want to risk them getting coronavirus a few weeks before they'll be eligible and able to get a vaccine for it? I'm sure Boris Johnson will get some questions about that. Me and Aaron will certainly be discussing that. We're not just going to talk about Boris Johnson and coronavirus this evening, though, because also at the end of the show, we have some Labour Party stories. A mass exodus from the party. 10% of Labour members have left since Keir Starmer became leader. You'll probably know why we don't think that's surprising. We've often said, we're pretty pissed off at Keir Starmer at the moment, but we have been saying that it's probably in your best interest to stay a member of the party, just so you can vote in internal elections. I've seen a persuasive argument from other people that potentially, what people can do is leave the party and just rejoin when a left-winger is up for election in future. I don't think that's an unreasonable argument, but there are NEC elections. I think Keir Starmer is probably going to be, I don't think he's going to be worried that 10,000 people are leaving. He's probably going to be more worried, though, that the polls are turning. Apparently, in the middle of a pandemic when 60,000 people have died and people are struggling to pay their rent, we're about to go through a very difficult winter. People talking about whether or not a 71-year-old should apologise for a Facebook post. It does seem like they've probably got things out of perspective. Their priorities are not right. We're going to discuss that at the end. For now, before Boris Johnson comes out, which should be happening any moment now, Aaron, your instant take on the free tier system he is announcing that's coming back in. We're going to go straight to Boris Johnson now.
Welcome to this latest COVID press conference. I'm joined, I'm delighted to say, by Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, and by Andrew Pollard, who's the Director of the Oxford Vaccine Project. It seems that almost every week we learn of some new scientific breakthrough to help us beat COVID. Last week it was good news about the vaccine from Pfizer-BioNTech and then Moderna. This morning we heard the fantastic news that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has been highly effective in clinical trials. There are more tests to be done, but the signs are that this vaccine, financed partly by British taxpayers working in partnership with a great British company, this vaccine could be both affordable and easy to use and highly effective. We've ordered 100 million doses, and thanks to the work of the Vaccines Task Force, we've secured more than 350 million doses of potential vaccines of all kinds. But we are not out of the woods yet. We can hear the drumming hooves of the cavalry coming over the brow of the hill, but they're not here yet. Even if all 3 vaccines are approved, even if the production timetables are met, and vaccines notoriously fall behind in their production timetables, it will be months before we can be sure that we've inoculated everyone that needs a vaccine. And those months will be hard, they will be cold, they include January and February, when the NHS is under its greatest pressure. And that is why when we come out of lockdown next week, we must not just throw away the gains we've all made. So today we've published our COVID winter plan. which sets out a clear strategy to take the country through to the end of March. We will continue to bear down hard on this virus. We will use tough tiering, in some ways tougher than the pre-lockdown measures, and details of those tiers are on the gov.uk website. Later this week, when we have the most up-to-date data, we'll be sharing details of about which tier your area is going to be in. But I should warn you now that many more places will be in higher tiers than, alas, was previously the case. We will simultaneously be using the new and exciting possibilities of community testing, as they've done in Liverpool. And there will be a clear incentive for everyone in areas where virus prevalence is high to get a test, get one of these rapid turnaround lateral flow tests, do your best for the community, get a test to help to squeeze the disease and reduce the restrictions that your town or city or area community has endured. And that way, through tough tiering and mass community testing, we hope to let people see a little more of their family and friends over Christmas. Now, I know that many of us want and need Christmas with our families. We feel after this year we deserve it. But this is not the moment to let the virus rip for the sake of Christmas parties. 'Tis the season to be jolly, but it is also the season to be jolly careful, especially with elderly relatives. And working with the devolved administrations, we will set out shortly how we want to get the balance right.
The jolly careful thing.
It's the season to be jolly, but also the season to be jolly careful.
What the hell is going on? Who are we being governed by?
We want to remain prudent.
The cavalry of scientific development is coming over the hill.
But we will use.
It's just amazing that a modern, large economy is run by people this ridiculous.
The weeks and months ahead. Tiering, testing, and the rollout of vaccines. Employing all three
Has he actually said anything
techniques together.
No.
So
this is the poetry part.
And drive down the infection rate. And I really am.
He's not said anything for 5 minutes.
Now that things.
It's amazing that we have a society and an economy which can develop a vaccine for a brand new virus in 9 months, but we don't have a government that can sort out Zoom for a prime minister who's self-isolating.
So it says something quite important, doesn't it, really?
Promise of the vaccines is fulfilled. We do have something to work for, a timescale, a goal around which we can all, businesses can begin tentatively to plan. But with luck and with hard work, we will be seeing improvements before then. For now, the problem is not a shortage of hope or a lack of optimism, not with the amazing news that we're getting from the laboratories in this country. The challenge now, as we face this difficult winter ahead, is to fight down any over-optimism, to master any tendency to premature celebration of success. That success will come all the faster if we work together to follow the guidance, maintain the basic disciplines, as people have done so heroically over the last few months. Hands, face, space, get a test if you have symptoms, because that is the way we will beat the virus together. I'm now going to hand over to Chris Whitty to say a little bit about where we are with the vaccine, and then to go to Andrew Pollard.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In fact, I was only going to say one thing, and that was an absolutely massive thank you to all of those up and down this country every day who are volunteering for studies into COVID. Some in vaccines, some in drugs, some in testing, and many in just trying to understand the disease. Because as we've repeatedly said, it is only science that is going to get us out of this hole. And people across the UK are
obviously they're not saying very much at the moment, but we're expecting something of substance to be said at some point. Chris Whitty at the moment is just saying thank you everyone for volunteering on the vaccine programs, which obviously great, well done. He's not giving us any poetry. The question and answers from the journalists will presumably be a bit more substantial. That's when Boris Johnson will be put on the spot. So far, this is very, very waffly, but we'll go back to Chris Whitty for a moment.
To help
He seems nice enough.
And everybody get out of the COVID hole. But it will be a long haul. And the main news from today is the remarkably good scientific achievement of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And Professor Pollard is the person who really can best outline that, Andy.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it is, I think, a very exciting day for all of us. And we're hugely proud of our team in Oxford who's been leading this effort. But I think it's important to pay tribute to the 20,000 volunteers that there are in the trials around the world, and over 10,000 here in the UK who've come forward in this uncertain time, feeling an absolute duty to play a part to help us get back on our feet and perhaps beat the virus. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in joining a clinical trial. And I think for all of us, having reached this point today, where we have evidence that the vaccine works, we have a huge debt of gratitude to all of those people who have taken part. Secondly, I just wanted to mention all of the researchers, and Chris pointed out that we have this amazing infrastructure in this country through the NHS and through the National Institute for Health Research, which meant that with 3 weeks' notice, I was able to contact 19 trial sites around the UK.
Yeah, there isn't much public health information. I think there's a couple of things going on here. It's AstraZeneca trying to get their stock market price up. I mean, they've come up with a very good vaccine, so we shouldn't be too critical. But I mean, this seems more like public relations than a public service announcement. I think the other thing it is, and this is probably more important, is that Boris Johnson was desperate to stand next to someone from AstraZeneca, because this is a government which has been, characterized by failure after failure after failure. This vaccine, obviously, an enormous success. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be some things to criticize along the way. Will they be making a lot of money out of it after the second half of next year? They've said they won't make a profit from it in the first half of the year, or while the pandemic is still ongoing. But afterwards, they will be able to. So I'm sure we'll be having more critical discussions about AstraZeneca in the future. For now, we're very glad a vaccine is here. But what's going on in this conference? Let's go back, see if he's talking to any more substance now.
There might be a way of immunising with the vaccine that gives even better protection. Clearly from today, we have to provide all of the data to the regulators so that they can scrutinise that very carefully and decide whether it's appropriate to move forward for licensure. And we look forward to working with them to provide everything that they need for that purpose in the days and weeks ahead. And if they do approve it, we potentially, with the dosing regime that could be used, we may have more doses available than we thought. We have a vaccine that can be used at fridge temperatures. It can be stored at fridge temperatures. And for us in Oxford, this was really important because we want to be able to make sure that this can be distributed not just in a country like this where we can manage any form of distribution, but around the world, because the virus actually isn't just a problem here in the UK, it is for everywhere. And our partnership with AstraZeneca has been critical because they agreed with our vision for this of having a not-for-profit approach during the pandemic, so that no one was
he's not from AstraZeneca, he's from the Oxford Vaccine Group, which is a consortium of people from Oxford University and AstraZeneca. So presumably him saying our partnership with AstraZeneca is he's from the Oxford part of that partnership.
Which is absolutely the vision that there should be from a university. So I think it's been a great day today for us, and as Chris said, for science, that here we've, in 11 months, been able to pull together...
Get the man a drink.
All of the data required
from
meet
where?
The requirements for regulators to be able to put that in.
Go to your nearest essentials shop, probably a supermarket.
Be part of what could be the end of the problems that we're facing that you were just hearing about from the Prime Minister. I think in the meantime, we certainly need to make sure that we protect each other through this period of time and have access to the new treatments that are coming along. But with all of those together, I'm also optimistic for next year. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew. And let's go straight to questions from the public. We've got David from East London.
Thank you and good evening. Won't going back to a localised approach to restrictions again after the 2nd of December lead to variable increases in the rate of infections, with disadvantaged areas suffering most?
Well, thank you very much, David. Obviously, we have variable
This country needs free broadband.
increases and decreases going
How's
on
Novara Media's
right
audio?
now. And one
Better
of
than
the
the Prime
interesting
Minister's.
So
things
much
is
better
that it's
than
some of
the
the areas that have been
Well, Fox is saying it's because of him.
hardest hit,
Okay,
and
but how's
some of the areas
how's a
actually that have been
13-year-old Twitch streamer so much better than the Prime
deprivation.
Minister?
We're starting to see some of the biggest declines in the virus. I think that's thanks to the work of communities in pulling.
What I hope he gets
in pulling together.
asked
Is
I'm afraid the bigger issue here is that the government make the big distinction between is it regionalised, is it nationalised. The bigger issue is that according to the government's own statistics, so the reproduction rate is 1 to 1.1. So the epidemic's still growing under the current conditions, and now they're about to loosen them. So it seems
Probably not wise.
the local national doesn't really seem like the relevant distinction. Maybe someone will ask him about it.
One or just in that area now, but use this tough tiering to keep pushing it down across the country, and that's the best thing for deprived communities everywhere. But I wonder whether Chris, you'd like to, or Andrew, would like to comment on that issue as well.
Prime Minister, I think you've actually summarised it completely. The key thing is we need to make sure that people are in the right tiers, and then people adhere to the guidance. And if we do that, then we can keep things down.
Thanks very much. Andrew, anything to add?
No, nothing to add to that.
Thank you so much. Let's go to...
I'm going to come back from the stream because it's getting a little bit too repetitive. Let's talk about the tier system which has been introduced. So what he just announced there, the tier system which is coming in, it was announced earlier in the House of Commons. And we can get up the graphics so it becomes clearer and we've got it written down. So we are going to have 3 tiers. Tier 1, medium. Follows the rule of 6 if meeting indoors or outdoors, pubs and restaurants to shut at 11 p.m. People encouraged to minimise travel and work from home where possible. Spectators allowed at sports events and live performances. Personal care, including hairdressing, allowed. So that's basically going to back what it was before this lockdown we're currently in. Although I don't think we had sports events with audiences before then. Tier 2. Which is high. No households mixing indoors. Rule of 6 will apply outdoors. Pubs and restaurants shut at 11 p.m. You'll note that 11 p.m. is now 1 hour later than what it had been. It was at 10 p.m. And alcohol will only be served with a substantial meal. Tier 2, spectators allowed at sports events. And then we'll go to Tier 3, which is very high. No household mixing indoors or outdoors in hospitality venues or gardens. Can we go on to Tier 3? Pubs and restaurants closed except for delivery and takeaways. Indoor entertainment venues closed. Guidance against travelling in and out of the area. Personal care, including hairdressing, allowed. So, I mean, the things to note here is that in this 3-tiered system, so Boris Johnson's saying it's tougher than it was last time, and it is, because pubs will be completely closed in Tier 3, whereas last time they could remain open if they served food. Now what you've got is shops, personal care, and gyms can stay open in every tier. Which I mean, as a gym goer, Aaron, I thought the whole gym system was a little bit surprising.
Well, I'm not really a gym goer anymore. This year it's been a very hard year for gym rats everywhere. You go in, you have a couple of good months, you go out. After the summer, I sort of didn't really want to do it because what I realised was that the cleanliness measures being taken by gyms weren't particularly rigorous. People were chaining up the squirty Bertie to the local cleaning station. It was quite performative and gestural. And it was pretty obvious to me that this wasn't really going to make much of a difference. So given, like you say, the R rate is already over 1, with what we have, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that opening gyms is ridiculous. Like, it's a crazy thing to do. I think opening up more generally is a bit of a crazy thing to do. But the fact that pubs are staying shut, gyms are opening, I don't know what the cost benefit is there. Maybe they've got some interesting data that says, various health outcomes are going up, diabetes type 2 and so on. We'll have, they get all the data sets. We'll have an extra 30, 40,000 deaths a year because of people not going to the gym. Who knows? However, it doesn't seem a wise thing moving forward. Same with indoor entertainment venues staying closed. So what's the difference between that and a gym? And then personal care. If you've got somebody who's a hairdresser or somebody threading your eyebrows or, a beautician, that's an incredible proximity between two people. Again, doesn't seem very safe. And this to me seems, and we'll talk about this, I guess, over the course of the show, this seems to me almost like, it's October 1918. You've got a month till the armistice, and you're kind of like, you're not really taking precautions about whether or not you die. We can still see many, many, many people die as a result of COVID over the next 6 months to a year, even though it's great that the vaccines are here. It's a huge breakthrough. It's going to lead to a lot of, presumably, political capital for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is barely coherent. I mean, my God, talk about luck. But I think we could see a doubling of the fatalities we've already had, and that's huge.
It is huge. Let's go on to the Christmas issue. Before we do that, actually, subscribe to this channel. We hit 100K over the weekend. We were delighted, and we've been waiting for that for quite a while. But we need to get up to 200K now. I'm not going to set any deadlines. But if you are new to this show, do hit that subscribe button. And not only do you get our analysis, you now get Downing Street press briefings. Which, sometimes I give you more. I prefer it when you've got the slides and they give you some information about developments as opposed to when you've just got, someone from a company doing PR about the product they've just developed, even though it is a very useful product. I will give them that. And let's go on to Christmas. Christmas is what was sort of making the headlines this morning. The government were briefing that there are going to be plans to loosen these restrictions for 5 days over the festive period. It seems as if what's going to be announced tomorrow is that up to 3 households can meet together over the Christmas period. It's not being announced until tomorrow because they've got to get it signed off by the various nations of the UK. They want it to be a 4 nations approach. And obviously this is welcome in terms of that will be a nicer Christmas. But as Aaron said, what seems odd about this, I suppose, is that we've got a vaccine coming very soon. They might be rolling it out next month, but basically they said most of it will be delivered between January and March to the vulnerable populations in this country. So why are we encouraging the vulnerable populations in this country to go hang out with a load of school children indoors for 5 days over the festive period? It all seems a little bit odd. It's potentially more of a political decision than a public health one. Let's take a look at Piers Morgan challenging Matt Hancock on just this issue this morning.
If it goes well, the vaccination programme, then we could be in a brilliant position, couldn't we, in a few months? Yeah, I think we all share the fingers crossed we do. This is good news, and it's obviously moved at a breathtaking pace. If we do get the vaccination programme off and running and it's smooth and we all get vaccinated and we get back to relative normality, say in a few months' time, it does beg the question, why are we putting so much emphasis right now, it seems to me, the government, on trying to give everybody a big, jolly 5-day Christmas knees up, when that could put us back in terms of infection rates and, sadly, deaths?
Well, I don't think it will do that. We haven't finally agreed a set of rules around Christmas, but I essentially agree that it needs to be careful, it needs to be balanced. We're trying to put in place an agreement across the whole of the UK, because so many people live in different parts of the UK and typically travel at Christmas. But there's this balance, Piers, between people wanting to see their families at Christmas, and by God, I know that, and at the same time, absolutely, as you say, keeping people safe.
And the real danger there, I thought, again, Piers Morgan is quite good at putting these questions to the government. But what worried me about that was Piers Morgan said, will this put us back in terms of infection rates and deaths? And Matt Hancock says, I don't think it will do that. Now, one thing it definitely will do is that, that there's no question that allowing people to meet indoors in multiple households over Christmas will cause some deaths and cause an increase in infections. Now, one can make a reasonable argument that the costs are not the costs of not meeting over Christmas are higher than the costs of doing it. You can say, yes, some people will die, but families have to make their own decisions. We don't want to ban people from spending this very special time together. We've been very open and honest about what the risks are. No, instead, you've got Matt Hancock coming out and saying, no, I don't think that's a risk at all. And it's one of those weird situations which we've had a bunch of times in this pandemic, which is where you have the government who kind of justify a policy decision by saying, this is how people will act, so we have to make this policy decision. But in making that policy decision, they have a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you remember at the start, back in March, they said, we won't do a lockdown because people will just break the rules. and that encouraged people to go out and break the rules. And now they're saying we won't have Christmas banned or Christmas separated or encourage people to have Christmas over Zoom because people will just break it. But now he's actively encouraging people to meet over Christmas. So by allowing it and then sort of saying this is no risk, they're actively encouraging people to take this risk over Christmas.
Has he actually said, here's the scientific evidence base by which we've made this decision? Has anybody actually done that yet?
Well, there isn't one because obviously it's...
Well, he's saying that that's just my opinion, but obviously the R rate's already over 1. That's with present restrictions. Clearly it's going to go up. So I don't quite understand. He's just a random guy. He has no scientific background, no epidemiological background. It's kind of a spurious way on which to sort of announce publicly to one of the biggest breakfast TV shows why you're doing something. Well, no, I kind of get a feeling that's not what will happen.
Well, I mean, there can't be any science to public. I mean, there's no scientific argument for why that in those 5 days, people meeting up in multiple households is it can only be a political decision to say, even though we know from a public health perspective this is bad, we think it's worth it because loneliness matters. I mean, probably people will get a bit depressed if they're on their own at Christmas.
But why 5 days?
There are arguments
That's what I didn't get.
Well, 5 days, it's just a rat.
But why 5 days? Say like Christmas
all of these
Day
things
and
are always
Boxing
going to be
Day.
arbitrary. Oh, you think it could just be 2?
Yeah. I mean, those are the bank holidays, right?
Well, I suppose the point is that if you've met, meeting for 2 days or meeting for 5 days doesn't make that much difference. They're just saying over these 5 days you can have
people will go,
a broader
I'll
bubble.
go see that family member. That it means basically a 5-day period where you can go see who you want to see.
That's kind of true.
It does seem kind of daft. Anyway,
let's
bank holidays are Christmas Day and Boxing Day.
Let's go to a scientist who does think this is daft. This is Gabriel Scally of Independence Age. He's been on this show a few times. He's also speaking to Good Morning Britain.
The price in terms of virus spread, that's why people are talking about having to have 25 days of tight restrictions to make up for the 5 days of jollity over Christmas. And it's not just the 25 days, that doesn't matter that much compared to the virus spreading and people getting infected. And there is no point in having a very Merry Christmas and then burying friends and relations in January and February. And we need to think very seriously about Christmas and how we're going to spend it. It's too dangerous a time and an opportunity for the virus to spread.
So, yeah, I mean, the danger there, and he's obviously saying a similar argument to what we've been saying. If you have a nice 5-day Christmas, but you end up killing your grandparent, are people going to think this is worth it? And what I want to discuss with you, Aaron, is, because obviously, we're not epidemiologists, is the political risk of this. Because it seems like a political decision that the government have made to say, look, we don't want to be the Grinches who stole Christmas. So we are going to sort of, they'll pose it as a sort of compassionate policy, balancing public health with the needs of families to get together over the holiday period. But if it turns out that you have a few high-profile stories of older people who were in line to get a vaccine in mid-January, who instead are dying in mid-January because they got coronavirus over Christmas, you've got potentially a really, dangerous narrative for the government emerging there if it turns out that afterwards you have these families saying like, yeah, we feel bad now because we invited granddad over and now he's passed away when he could have had a vaccine in 3 months. We wish we'd waited.
I completely agree. I was talking about this yesterday to my partner. Obviously, this stuff was leaked over the weekend. Government by, not even press release, government by leaked to Robert Peston's Twitter account. And I said, look, obviously we want to spend Christmas with family members. We were surprised it was more than 2 households. That's what we expected. But then you think, okay, well, as a result of these, and by the way, I don't actually think, for instance, I don't think my dad would want to spend Christmas Day with me, given normally he does, given the potential consequences. I, as somebody who would love to spend time with friends and family over Christmas, if the consequence of this change in restrictions was 30,000 net deaths nationally, if it meant that some people I know or a friend of a friend or a family member of a friend died, I would feel awful. Especially given we know there is light at the end of the tunnel. If we didn't know when this ended, if we thought, a vaccine might be here in 3-4 years or maybe never, then I understand it. But given we're going to get the potential deployment of vaccines in this country as soon as next month, as soon as December, it just seems really reckless. And the Grinch thing, I don't know why they couldn't just say, we'd rather you not do this. If people want to be with an extra household, you do it, but you don't really do it with our blessing. I get that. Fine. But like you say, this open your arms and saying, 5 days of, let's be real, a free-for-all. I went to an industrial estate on Saturday, went shopping, Lidl, and there was like a kitchen store, Carpet Right, they're all open. And I'm thinking, These aren't essential stores. And if that's now, what's this period going to look like over Christmas, especially given the year everybody's had? I think we could get some appalling, tragic headlines coming out of this. And you're right to ask that question, what kind of overhead might that represent for the government going forward into 2021?
I think they probably think we're kind of used to old people dying now. But sort of the political cost of denying us Christmas would be larger. I mean, I think, because obviously, Labour or any opposition doesn't really want to get into the position of saying, no, we're for banning Christmas. But I always thought the government would do this, which is that, say, we're going to have a really strict 2-week circuit breaker running up to Christmas to save Christmas. And so they say, this is the strictest lockdown we've ever had. Schools will be closed for that 2 weeks. It would probably only be a week off school because schools close anyway before Christmas. You'd have kind of everything closed and you say, basically stay in your houses. You get R really low so that, hardly anyone has coronavirus by the time you get into Christmas. And then you say, you have earned this on the 24th of December. Now you can go visit your family and you can be pretty goddamn confident that none of you are sick. But they haven't done that. They've done the opposite, which is say what we're going to do is loosen restrictions in the run-up to Christmas before letting older people and younger people and all the different generations in families meet up inside for 5 days. So to me, it seems like one or the other. Say we'll have a sort of moderate loosening of a lockdown, but that means you don't get Christmas or you don't get a normalish Christmas. Or say we're going to go real hard now and then you get a good Christmas. Sort of have that sensible debate with the public. And I think they'd probably side with the let's have the strict 2 weeks and then a decent Christmas. But my assumption is the reason they're not offering that is because it would be bad for retail. So a lot of what seems to be driving the government is they don't want to, stump up the cash that would be needed to replace the revenue of businesses over Christmas. So what they want to do is encourage us back into shops, even if that means a few people die when they could have just got a vaccine a month later. We're going to go on to the vaccine in a moment. Before we go on to the vaccine, Aaron, any last points on Christmas, on the tiers?
None at all. I'm just, it's a bad political decision, as with so much over the last 7 to 8 months. Will there be consequences to the government? Probably not. That'll be our final story with regards to Labour and polling, so stay tuned.
Great. We're going to go to the vaccine. The good news keeps rolling in the development of a new COVID-19 vaccine. The Pfizer, Moderna and Russian-based Sputnik vaccine have already been shown to be very effective. They are now joined by the vaccine produced by Oxford University in partnership with AstraZeneca. So the vaccine, results of which were released today, has been shown to be 70% effective and potentially up to 90% effective when used with the right dosage. That's using half the dose the first time around and the full dose the second time around. All of the vaccines which have been tested so far require you to have 2 doses. The issue here is that the 90% with the half dose and the full dose, the case numbers seem to be very low, so there'll be a big margin of error there. But before we talk about this, let's take a look at Andrew Pollard. You saw him in that press briefing. He's head of the Oxford Vaccine Group, and here he is explaining the results.
What we found is that overall in the trials across the UK and Brazil, we've managed to prevent about 70% of infections. But importantly, in people who were vaccinated with the new coronavirus vaccine, no one was hospitalized or had severe disease. So that sort of 70% figure is giving us an idea about the overall protection, including the mild infections. And intriguingly, in one of the groups that we had, where we gave a half dose of the first dose and then a full dose, we saw 90% protection. And so that suggests that we've got a regimen of vaccinating that might allow a lot more doses to be used because we only need half a dose for the first one, and yet we're seeing even higher protection. And there's also a really interesting hint in the data that regimen is also able to reduce asymptomatic infection. And if that's the case, it might allow us to get to a point where we can halt the virus in its tracks and it can't transmit from person to person. So I think this is very exciting news. There's obviously going to be a lot more data to come over the next month or so. But as a first interim look at the data, I think this is incredibly positive that we have a vaccine that could be distributed using the normal immunization systems through fridges around the world. And because it's a partnership that we set up with AstraZeneca that's not for profit, it's going to be affordable everywhere that we can get it.
That not-for-profit point at the end. Yep, that is good. During the pandemic, they are going to be offering this at not-for-profit prices. Apparently, it's going for £3 a pop, which, if you look at the amounts that the government are spending on other aspects of sort of pandemic relief, that's pretty cheap as a solution to this terrible pandemic. In developing countries, my understanding is it's going to remain non-profit forever, in perpetuity. And in this country, or in developed countries, richer countries, it is going to start being for-profit once they are able to declare that the pandemic is over. It's slightly unclear who gets to make that decision, but it's written into contracts that they have signed that it could be as early as July next year. So then maybe we will have more of a debate about how this thing is priced. Although the fact that you've got a bunch of different companies means you might have a bit of competition. Although, I mean, there's few enough of them that they could probably work out how to keep prices artificially high. The most exciting thing really about the AstraZeneca vaccine is that you can store it at normal temperatures. As I say, it's going to be cheap, £3 per course compared to £15 for Pfizer and £30 for Moderna. While other people are reporting £25, seem to be varying depending on who's signed the contract. Aaron, obviously the PR people would have probably been a little bit disappointed when they were like, this is amazing, this is what we were hoping for, but now they release 70% effectiveness when you've had all of these vaccines last week and the week before announcing 90% effectiveness. But at the same time, because this doesn't need to be stored at incredibly cold temperatures, this probably will be the vaccine which is used by most people around the world.
I don't know. I think that's probably right, but also realistically, let's look at the broader political context here. Britain's leaving the European Union in 5 weeks. We don't have a real industrial strategy. We don't have big national champions. And all of a sudden, the biggest pandemic in a century, you're saying that AstraZeneca, which is based in the UK, it's a UK pharmaceutical company, in collaboration with Oxford, has produced, the best vaccine so far. Now, that may be true, but even they themselves are saying that the data is inconclusive with regards to what two doses may do in terms of addressing this. So I still think there's a lot of ambiguity around this. And I do feel like, for instance, that press conference we were watching at the start of all this, that felt just like a public relations exercise for AstraZeneca and the government, this nexus between business and politics in Britain. AstraZeneca, unlike Pfizer, is a British company, right? They want a national champion. It's a huge matter of national prestige, by the way, whoever produces the best vaccine here. However, if this is correct, and we've no reason to suspect it isn't correct, you're absolutely right. £3 is very cheap. So even if it came to the fact that we all have to be immunised, or 75% of us have to be immunised every year forever, that's still a remarkably cheap intervention, right? So let's say 55 million Brits had to do it every year. Well, you're looking at £175 million. I mean, that's really cheap.
Yeah.
There'll be other coronaviruses in the future. As we've talked about before, there's several thousand distinct coronaviruses, maybe 500 can come through to humans. We've had 3 this century. But the method by which these vaccines have been created, whether it's the mRNA ones or the RNA ones, the fact that the genome for the coronavirus COVID-19, it was modeled, I think, as early as March this year, that would indicate that we can broadly adopt the same techniques with each distinct coronavirus going forward. There will be more. They probably won't be as bad, but they could be. They could be even worse. So it's a huge thing. It's a huge, huge thing for the pharmaceutical company that comes up with the best solution to this. And of course, price is a major variable. A $30 vaccine for a country like Nigeria, 200 million plus people, low GDP per capita. Yeah, that's an issue.
Let's talk about mass testing in a moment, because this is kind of the weirdest thing. Again, this is another one where it seems strange that we're going to spend £100 billion on it when a vaccine is around the corner. But before we do that, do please donate to Novara Media. As you know, this organisation is only possible, this show is only possible, we can only continue growing because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber, thank you so much. You make this possible. If not, please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Mass testing. So another thing Johnson announced today, he announced it in Parliament, repeated it today in that press conference, is they want to ramp up lateral flow testing. These are the tests that have been much touted by the government. They work a bit like pregnancy tests. They give you a result in 30 minutes as to whether or not you've got COVID-19. They've currently been rolled out in Liverpool. It was intended to test the whole population of 500,000 people in a period of 3 weeks. It turned out being 125,000 people, but I mean, that's still a lot of people. You know, credit where it's due. And the government are sort of touting this as a success because rates of coronavirus in Liverpool have dropped fairly dramatically by about 2/3 over the same period. The government are now saying this is reason to roll it out nationwide. There are a couple of problems with this, though. So one, the cost is going to cost £100 billion, which potentially, when you've got a vaccine around the corner, seems fairly steep. But that's not really my biggest concern. What worries me is what the government are sort of proposing they're going to use it for. So Boris Johnson has been saying that what we can do if we have these lateral flow tests sort of pumped out to the whole population, basically, is we can incentivize people to use them by saying, if you test negative, you can get access to certain venues or services or whatever, because we now know you're negative. The problem with that is, and there was a really good article in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, about this, the false negatives for these tests are about 50%. So if you've got people who've said, I've tested negative, now I can go to the pub, you're going to be creating a load of super spreader events by accident of people thinking, well, I don't have to take any precautions now. So whilst it seems like there could be a role for this, and the reason I would say it's worked in Liverpool is because it was in conjunction with all of the social distancing measures. So they're sort of boasting, rightly, that they sort of isolated a lot of people who didn't know they had coronavirus, who were asymptomatic but got tested and then found out they needed to isolate. That was in a context where all of the people who got tested negative couldn't really go out and say, yes, I'm negative, I can go out to clubs, I can go out to pubs, because clubs and pubs were closed. What Boris Johnson seems to be touting is these lateral flow tests as a way that we can go back to normal before the vaccine is here. And that seems a bit more like an attempt for him to sort of assuage the concerns of his backbenchers who are more interested in businesses opening than saving lives than anything which is, I suppose, argued for or makes sense within a framework of public health. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because the Moonshot project, I mean, this had a big sort of political role in the project of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. It was said that this is what Dominic Cummings was obsessed with for the months before he quit. This what they're calling a moonshot, sort of based on the attempt by the United States to go to the moon, something that sort of excited.
Successful attempt, we should add.
Successful. I mean, it's an attempt which has inspired lots of people on the left. So that's what Mariana Mazzucato uses as her example of how you get fabulous innovations when you have a mission-orientated industrial policy. And maybe we will get some great innovations out of this. But at the same time, it seems a bit like this would have been a useful thing to really develop and expand and invest billions in if we weren't about to have a vaccine. Now it just seems like, why not just spend that money on replacing people's incomes until March, when we can basically go back to normal anyway, because winter will be ending and vulnerable people will have been vaccinated and non-vulnerable people will be in the process of getting vaccinated. It seems a bit like they've started this project, so they're going to finish it, even if it doesn't make much epidemiological sense.
That's completely true. And also this idea that, innovation is always good. The Moonshot, the Manhattan Project, there was also Concorde, right? Not all big innovation efforts are successful. Many fail because there are high risks involved. That's just how it is. If they always worked, if they always created a net benefit, everybody would do them all the time. It's the reason why they're fixated with this, and this feeds into a conversation I had earlier on today with David Edgerton that's going out on Novara Media tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Brilliant historian, Rise and Fall of the British Nation. And his whole thing is 20th century British industrial policy and innovation, is that precisely to conceal the fact that Britain's political elite today have no vision about how they want to govern effectively, there has to be this perennial retrofuturism of moonshots and wartime. Britain, immediately following 1945, Britain was the world's largest exporter of cars, very briefly. During the Second World War, Britain was the world's largest producer of aeroplanes. That is what they want to go back to, and they want Britain to lead, and they say this quite openly. We're leading in genomics and AI and No, we're not. We're a relatively affluent country of 65 million people. We can't compete with China and the US and the EU combined. We can't. It's nonsense. But things like the moonshot or the innovation agency that also Dominic Cummings wants to set up, and which probably will happen after we leave the European Union, based on the US DARPA, which gave the world the internet. This is less about effective policy and more about a political statement about the kind of country Britain is going to be after Brexit. So we did the moonshot. It's about big numbers. We did billions of tests, and it cost billions of pounds, and nobody said we could do it. That's far more alluring to them in terms of creating and fostering a narrative for post-Brexit Britain than saying, yeah, actually, we increased universal credit and we capped rents for 6 months, and actually we made sure that there weren't people who needed cancer treatments who were neglected because of COVID-19. That's far less interesting for them. The big thing with Boris Johnson after Brexit, after January 2021, is a sort of Promethean, regenerative, new Britain, right? It's very much post-war, which is really interesting, right? Because it's sort of intellectual, thematic sources are actually 1945 and sort of Attlee government. If you're thinking about where this comes from, it comes from the post-war left. We're going to rebuild a country fit for all. And so I think it's really about a sort of political symbolism rather than anything that's actually meant to work.
Well, it could, I think in terms of the motivations, you're correct. And especially with Dominic Cummings, it was very unclear. He wanted to break the system. He wanted to revolutionise Whitehall, and everyone was like, why? Well, what's your end game? He didn't seem to have one. And then, beyond winning elections, where there's a clear end result there that you're trying to achieve, he sort of flopped. But even if their incentives aren't amazing, it could have some decent outgrowths, right? So DARPA, you're saying, that gave us the internet. That was military competition in the Cold War. So you can get sort of side benefits from these things. And if sort of the goal is national regeneration, and if it's testing instead of bombing, fine. So
2 things. That's absolutely true. We should clearly want, what Matt Zuccato calls the entrepreneurial state. The first point I tried to make as to say, this may not be the Manhattan Project, it may be Concord, is that we need to also understand and accept that things don't always work out positively. There's a litany of failures behind these things, right? Secondly, you're saying, the United States in the 1970s. The United States, after 1945, had, I think, 2/3 of the world gold supply. It was by far the world's largest economy. It's a country today of 300 million people. You cannot compare Britain, its economic sort of weight, the size of its population, the number of graduates it has, the levels of innovation it has, the fixed capital it has, Silicon Valley. This is just a silly thing. Britain can be a larger, more successful version of Finland. It cannot be like the United States. That's the kind of mental universe we need to inhabit. And I'd rather be like Finland than the United States, right? So, but again, I think this idea of DARPA, the idea of moonshots and a Manhattan Project, this serves a particular political purpose. Now, it's possible that it's not entirely negative. You're right. Because clearly one of the major risks of the 21st century will be more pandemics. And if we now have a national infrastructure to deal with this the next time round, which is what South Korea and Japan had this time because they had to deal with SARS 17 years ago, then that's fantastic. But there clearly also has to be a cost benefit here. And if we're going to spend tens of billions on something, which, like you say, will be rendered obsolete by virtue of a vaccine, which will cost hundreds of millions next year, I fail to see where the sort of policy wisdom in that is.
The other worry is it's just that some of their mates have sort of signed up to a very lucrative contract, and they're not that interested in value for money if the money is just being pumped to their mates. We'll have to look into that one, how it might relate to the moonshot. We're going to go on to our next story, which is public sector pay, in one moment. First of all, let's go to some super chats. Roberta JM with a £5 super chat. The weekend without you guys is unbearable. To be honest, in lockdown, my weekends without you are unbearable at the moment. I will continue to support you guys until you are on every single day somehow. DAB, YouTube, TV, or something else. Roberta JM, thank you so much. That is an ambition of ours. Although I presume it won't be me 7 nights a week. Joe Simpson with Fiverr. Congrats on 100k subs. Any chance of getting Mesh and Reacher on again to discuss the vaccines mass testing? Would be good to hear from frontline medics. I'm sure that's very possible. We'll look into that one. Username gives a £5 super chat. Username, yeah, I suppose that's just that you didn't put in a username. Congratulations for 100,000 YouTube subscribers. Thank you so much. It's because all of you guys hit subscribe. Now I can sleep easy. Delighted. And Anna W with 30 quid. Hi, Michael. Please, can you give a birthday shout out to my daughter, Sophia? Fox deleted my comment before I read it again. She got me into Novara Media in the first lockdown, and now I'm addicted, and I've learned a lot too. Keep up the good work. Happy birthday, Sophia, and thank you so much, Anna. 2020 has been a tough year. Lockdowns have damaged our collective mental health, our social lives, and for many people, our bank balances. But even though a vaccine appears to be around the corner, Rishi Sunak seems committed to dampening any celebration. It's been widely briefed that in Wednesday's spending review, the Chancellor will announce a pay freeze for everyone in the public sector. Although actually I should say probably not people working in frontline health services, because they think that would be too controversial. So this will be teachers, firefighters, etc. On Sunday, Sunak would neither confirm nor deny a freeze was incoming, but was full of justifications for one.
You will not see austerity next week. What you will see is an increase in the government spending on day-to-day public services, quite a significant one coming on the increase that we had last year. So I think there's absolutely no way in which anyone could say that's austerity. We'll be spending more money on public services than we were. And then, with regard, I can't comment on future pay policy in advance of the spending review, but what I would say is when we launched the spending review, I did say to departments that when we think about public settlements, I think it would be entirely reasonable to think about those in the context of the wider economic climate. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. It would be fair to also think about what's happening with wages, with jobs, with hours across the economy.
So also on Sunday, Annalise Dodds, who is Labour's shadow chancellor, pushed back against the proposal.
Freezing public sector pay would save a huge amount of money, 23 billion or whatever it is, over the next couple of years, a massive amount of money. And I just put to you, as a question of fairness and equity, when you see what's happened to workers in the private sector, that is a reasonable way to start to make some savings, isn't it?
Well, with respect, that estimation was put forward by a think tank, and they didn't take into account the impact of this on our high streets and small businesses in particular. What this measure would do is it would say to our firefighters, hospital porters, teaching assistants that they will have less spending power in the future. That means they won't be spending in our high streets, they won't be spending in our small businesses. And that's a very, very good way of knocking confidence out of our economy at a time when, as I said, the UK is an outlier. Our economic downturn has been deeper than that in the rest of the G7. What needs to be done now by government is to build economic confidence up, not shoot it down.
I'm still slightly confused as to whether you think there should or shouldn't be a freeze on public sector wages.
Well, to be clear, I do not believe that there should be that freeze right now. I think that's economically very damaging. It's an irresponsible choice. I believe that it's wrong for the Chancellor, if that is what he will be going ahead with, to be pitting different groups of workers against each other, when, as I said, the implication of this for our high streets, for our small businesses, would be very negative, because it would knock confidence out of our local economy.
That was Annalise Dodds, making what I thought was a pretty decent argument there. We weren't particularly complimentary about her on Friday's show, because she was talking nonsense, really, about Corbyn's whip being suspended, putting forward some arguments which I didn't think were particularly honest. But on this, the Labour Party seemed to be taking a clear position. Obviously, there should be no public sector pay freeze when we're in the middle of still a massive economic downturn that's going to take demand out of the economy. And also, most importantly, you've got all of these people who've had a very difficult time during the pandemic, and you're saying you're going to be rewarded by what's essentially a pay cut. Obviously, a pay freeze because of inflation is in real terms a pay cut. And this is going to include, I've seen sort of right-wingers on Twitter sort of saying this is going to go to teachers who've had 4 months off during coronavirus. And it's like, teachers, during this lockdown, when I've been, in my house, safe enough, watching TV series, teachers have been going into school 5 days a week in a place which is probably the most dangerous in terms of catching coronavirus in the country at the moment. If you work in a hospital, at least you've got good PPE. Teachers, they're basically, putting themselves at enormous risk to be doing an absolutely essential job. We're all arguing. My position is that I'm not comfortable arguing for schools to close, because I think that the education of people at that formative time in their life is so important. But the one thing we absolutely should be doing is saying a big fucking thank you to teachers for not only going out and working when other people are furloughed, but doing so in an incredibly dangerous environment. So for now, the government to be saying, we're going to freeze your pay is pretty disgraceful. Also seems pretty unnecessary. What do you think is going on here, Aaron? What's the political logic here?
So public sector pay was frozen from 2010 to 2018. So in 2020-21, you're asking people potentially, this has not been confirmed, it seems almost certain, particularly in the context of the Tories also saying they're not going to give a proposed £3,000 pay increase to MPs. They'll say, well, we're not taking a pay increase, so neither should the rest of the public sector. Between 2000 and 2021, for 9 of those 11 years, people have seen their pay capped. Now, what the Tories are trying to do is exactly what they did in the immediate aftermath of 2010. They say the public sector gets a better deal than the private sector, and therefore you get actually quite a lot of consent for quite a regressive policy. Now, yes, what Annalise Dodd says there is true, and it's a stupid policy, but this needs to be made really clear to people. The absolute last thing you want to do after the economy is contracted by 10%, when businesses are shutting down, is to cap people's pay. Now, understand this if you're a small business. You sell sandwiches, or you sell trainers, or you sell clothes, or whatever, or you're a plumber or a tradesman. All your customers who are in the private sector, let's say their pay has stagnated, it's frozen for whatever reason, right? They're not going to get those shoes or get that new kitchen they were planning to do so. What this is basically saying is, well, because they can't afford to do it, neither should these people either. So you're sucking such huge amounts of demand out of the economy, it creates this downward spiral. Now, we've had a lost decade. We have lost 10 years in this country of living standard increases potentially since 2010. And we're going to have another one. 20 years is a really long time, And for people who were 18 in 2008, they're going to be in their 40s potentially by the time we actually see significant, substantial year-on-year living increases. That is no way to run a country, and it's never happened before. And so Labour have to kill this theme of distinguishing between private and public sector workers stone dead. Because if it gets a foothold in the broader conversation, it's going to have perilous consequences for all of us. Absolutely everybody. It doesn't help anybody if in the middle of a recession, public sector workers see pay freezes for the 9th year in the last 11. So stupid, it almost defies description. But Labour are going to have to explain that in a really basic, clear manner. They can't adopt the language of sort of pontificating macroeconomics, right? Sucking demand out of the economy. Explain why. You're a taxi driver? Well, that person who would buy that, pay that fare, they now won't do it, right? It's the exact same argument we need to make for increasing the minimum wage. You're doing it because it means people can buy more goods and services. And you've got goods and services to sell? Well, guess what? That's good for you. If Labour don't do that, I think the Tories are going to win this debate.
Mm. I mean, to be fair, she kind of did do that, right? She was saying this is the money that gets spent on the high street. I suppose you could make it even more practical, saying, are you a taxi driver? This is the money in your pocket. You probably can make it even more concrete. We're going to go on to a story which is where Labour come out much less well in one moment. First of all, Aaron Ferkel with a fiver. Restrictions brought in just before Eid and Diwali, but loosened before Christmas. Either it's safe or it isn't. That's a very important point, and I think suggests why this is probably more political than based on our mental health. Because obviously, if you're Muslim or Hindu, then the time when you're going to feel most, bitter or worried or sad about being alone is probably over Eid or Diwali, not over Christmas. Yet over those holidays, the government seemed to sort of bring in restrictions precisely because they were worried that those holidays would increase transmission, whereas before Christmas, what we're doing is the opposite. We're saying, well, there's this opportunity for transmission to be increased. We're going to give it the go-ahead, which makes it. You also see, actually, I think the Tories might be trying to start an argument on this because it seems to be in the lines of the government ministers that they go on TV and say, Christmas is our most important holiday. And I think what they want is pushback, because I think they want a debate about Christmas, is it good or not? Because they know that the majority of the public think that Christmas is, and they'd like to turn this into a culture war. I don't see at this point in time anyone really biting, but that is a very important point that you make. Helen Williams with 1350, nailing it again. So grateful to you at Novara Media for keeping the truth alive and with words we all understand without needing a dictionary. Helen Williams, thank you so much for those kind words and for your super chat. Final story. We've been pretty annoyed with Keir Starmer of late. I'm going to start that again. We've been pretty annoyed with Keir Starmer of late that we have been encouraging people to stay in the Labour Party so you can vote in NEC elections and so the left can still have influence within the party. The Times, though, are reporting that not all of you are listening. 250 people a day since Keir Starmer was elected last spring have been leaving the Labour Party. Yes, membership fell by just under 57,000 people, or 10%, between April and November. From the Times write-up, according to figures published by Labour, it had 552,835 members eligible to vote in its leadership election in April. That figure had fallen to 495,961 in the National Executive Committee elections 2 weeks later. Insiders believe that its real membership could be below 450,000 when lapsed members, those who had stopped paying their subscription, are taken into account. Aaron, this has been sort of shared as evidence that Keir Starmer is sort of losing the dynamism that came with the movement party from at least the first years of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. 2017, for example, it worked pretty well. By 2019, obviously everything had gone wrong, but it's hard to argue that a small party is better than a big party. At the same time, do you think this will just be music to Keir Starmer's ears? Because presumably the people who have left the party are disproportionately those who support Jeremy Corbyn and who might be voting for different slates when it comes to things like the NEC election or even parliamentary selections.
First of all, it's more than 50,000. I mean, it's at least 50,000. And I think the paper is right there in saying it's probably close to 100,000. Could be more. We know that because clearly just the turnout was so astronomically low for the most recent NEC elections. I think it's almost certainly more than 100,000 people have left. And you're right to say that most of those people, not all of them, we don't actually know, it might not be as high as it potentially could be, but it seems primarily people from the left who could be the basis of a return to the sorts of policies we saw up until last year. Could it be music to his ears? I mean, Keir Starmer's getting so much wrong at the moment, and his supporters and allies are cheering on so many things which are leading to negative consequences. I think they'll try and dress it up as, yes, this is exactly what we want, right? As we're going to see, we're polling below a Conservative Party and we're falling in the context of 6,000 deaths. His first 6 months as leader have been entirely nondescript. So I think they're going to say that. I think primarily, actually, the biggest problem for them with regards to falling membership is also you're saying a sort of salami slicing of union funds. We've talked about this before. And the big donors aren't coming yet. Now, they may well come, right? They may well come. But when you've got local elections to fight next May, it's a problem. So if Labour do poorly next May, if the members keep on going, if the unions keep on reducing funds to the party, I think gave 9 million to Labour in 2019, and those donors don't come, then all of a sudden he's in quite a weak situation. I do think it's possible that in 12 months' time, not even 12 months, in 8 months' time after May, if Labour do badly, or they underperform, by the way, I don't think they will, but let's just say they do for the sake of argument, I think people will be saying Keir Starmer should consider his position. Now, I don't think that means the left should launch a leadership election for 2 reasons. First of all, it's not strong enough to do so. Secondly, I think it would be a perfectly fair criticism to say in response to that, he hasn't had time. You can't say, well, Jeremy Corbyn wasn't given a shot by the time of the chicken coup. They did it within 12 months of him becoming leader, and then doing the exact same thing, although it'd be 18 months. So I think it does create problems for Keir Starmer. And if the next 6 months are like the last 6 months, people will be calling for his head. But if he is replaced, and I suspect he wouldn't be, it would almost certainly be by somebody from the right of the party rather than the left.
I disagree with that. I mean, the right still don't have the membership who could win them a leadership election. So, I mean, I
think... It'd be somebody in the pocket of the right.
Your argument there, I think, it'd be the right who are most likely to successfully mount a challenge because they have the MPs. The left still, the Socialist Campaign Group can't really get enough nominations for someone to challenge Keir Starmer from the left, but someone from the right potentially could. There's still a big base for the right in the party, but I don't think they're going to do that soon because if you think about it, the one thing that could be bringing Keir Starmer down in the polls is his sort of small c conservatism and him attacking and dividing the left, which they love. So I mean, I think his position is safe.
I don't know. Let me clarify because it's important. I don't think the right want to get rid of Keir Starmer. What I'm saying is, in the scenario where Keir Starmer goes, for whatever reason, let's say there's a calamitous local election results next year, and they're running out of money really quickly. All I'm saying is, were he to be replaced by somebody, it would not be somebody from the left. It might be Angela Rayner, in which case the left all of a sudden would have to back somebody who, we saw the fallout when she was backed by Momentum, for instance, deputy leader last year. I think Angela Rayner is a very compelling politician. But in any case, she wouldn't necessarily, in a policy respect, be to the left significantly of Keir Starmer. She wouldn't be doing a lot of the crap he's doing right now, but, on Green New Deal, on housing, would she be to the left of Keir Starmer? We don't really know. Probably not, actually. So that's all I want to say. I think it's possible for Keir Starmer to be weakened, to be doing terribly, and for that not to redound to the benefit of the left of the party anytime soon.
Let's go on to another story which is apparently damaging Keir Starmer, according to people close to him. This is from The Observer. They're reporting that party insiders believe the Ford inquiry could be a major flashpoint damaging Starmer's leadership. So the Ford inquiry, for anyone who hasn't got that stored in their mind, was launched to investigate the leaked dossier on Labour anti-Semitism and factionalism. So this was put together while Jeremy Corbyn was still leader under Jenny Formby as General Secretary, and it was meant to be a submission to the EHRC to sort of show how factionalism had contributed to the poor handling of complaints of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, because the EHRC was sort of looking at this as the party is one coherent institution who we can find guilty or innocent, and they're saying, look, wait a minute, you have to take into account there was a civil war going on, we tried, they mocked it, whatever. That ended up getting leaked because lawyers didn't want to hand it to the EHRC. The Ford inquiry is an inquiry into both its contents and the situation in which it was compiled and the situation in which it was leaked. The Observer are reporting that concerns have now emerged over the scale and unpredictability of the independent inquiry, which insiders fear has taken on a life of its own. It is understood to have received hundreds of submissions. Party figures said the inquiry was going anywhere and everywhere. Another said, we have created a real millstone here. This could be sorted out, frankly, in a few weeks, but the inquiry seems to be looking at everything. It's become a nightmare. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this, Aaron, because there's a couple of options here. So one is that sort of Keir Starmer launched this thinking, I'll just start a review and that will put the issue to bed and I can kind of get them to sort of put forward what I want. So a possible outcome is that this is actually running out of his control, and that he's sort of adopted or hired some people, or appointed, sorry is the word, who are more independent than he was hoping and are going to sort of tell fundamentally the truth about what happened. And so they're briefing beforehand to, I suppose, try and potentially dismiss the results, but also to sort of kite fly a bit to sort of say maybe you should tone it down a bit to whoever is doing this report. The other option, though, is that what they're trying to do is set expectations quite high for this report. So if you're here with the HRC report, for example, I was on the radio with Margaret Hodge on Saturday. Incredibly rude person. Very, very unpleasant.
Just not a nice person.
Just not a nice person. Just seemed very, very unpleasant. Anyway, she was saying, and her line has constantly been since the HRC report, she's saying, oh, it's so much worse than I could have possibly imagined. I read it and I was just thinking, this is so strong. This is so much stronger than anything I could have imagined. And you just stop listening to that thing like, one, what were you expecting? And two, what report did you read? Because I mean, if you read the report, even though everyone says the damning report, and yeah, it's not a report that says, yeah, the Labour Party did great, but the details of it basically are it had a defunct complaints system, which basically everyone's admitted over the past 5 years, and they say it improved under Jenny Formby, and that they have two examples of people on Twitter dismissing claims of anti-Semitism to the extent that they think is an abuse because it sort of encourages an atmosphere where Jews aren't welcome. That was people basically saying, this is all factional, this is all invented by the Israel lobby. So I don't know I don't know how good she was expecting it to be for her to find this completely damning. But I find it a bit of a ridiculous argument, really. And I'm wondering if that's what's happening here. The Labour Party are sort of ramping this up as an independent investigation that they think is going to be really problematic for Keir, to sort of make it sound independent. And then when it comes out and it's actually a bit of a whitewash, they can say, oh, well, we've been saying that this is going to be really damaging for Keir because it was so independent. And then it gets released and they're like, and look, this was supposed to be a real problem for Keir Starmer, and actually it's totally backing him. Actually, it turns out this report, which was supposed to be so difficult and running wild and independent, it must be correct because we were worried about it. And what it has shown is Keir Starmer's great, Jeremy Corbyn's terrible, and everyone on the left should be purged.
I think that may be true. I think that would be very smart expectations management. However, what came through in that article in The Observer was this idea that it's mushrooming. And that, I think, is probably true. Because what Keir Starmer did to sort of defang the political contents of that report was to say, we want to look at the contents of that report, how it was leaked, and who it was leaked by. So it was really expanded. Rather than say, let's talk about what's in this report, it's not acceptable, he tried to actually make its purview much broader to make it less politically toxic for him. And it may be that has political consequences for him. And it may be that actually it's a very big report, and the bigger it is, the worse it is. You know, the HRC report, the media can represent it how they like. The HRC report basically had 3 very critical things to say about Labour. You know, how it acted unlawfully with regards to political intervention, with regards to specific complaints, the behaviour of certain agents of the party, and its complaints process, right? That's it. In 10 seconds, I've explained the HRC report and how it's negative. This may be much, much broader. And so I think there's probably some truth to it. However, I don't think it's going to be... We had a great article about this, by the way. It won't be looking at, for instance, it should be investigating what was Operation Cupcake. It's alluded to in the leaked document. What MPs were involved? What party grandees were involved?
What was Operation Cupcake?
Operation Cupcake was the idea that you have in the senior management team WhatsApp group within months of Corbyn winning is basically an organised effort to get rid of him. That's what's called Operation Cupcake. You know, clearly, there's a term being used by senior members of staff referring to a coordinated effort to get rid of the elected leader, and it had a name. I think that should have its own investigation. And Starmer hasn't done that. So I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't really expect anything from the Ford inquiry. However, its timing is bad for Starmer. He's got poor polling results. Members are leaving. You've had, obviously, the whole farrago following Jeremy Corbyn being suspended. 5 weeks ago, Starmer's personal approval ratings were very good. Labour, that week that Corbyn was suspended, were 5 points ahead of the Tories in one opinion poll, primarily because of Marcus Rashford. Yes, it's not dreadful for Labour yet, but it's very bad. Things have turned around remarkably quickly for Labour. It's been very bad. If the next month is like the last month, again, that is not the context you want the Ford inquiry to be releasing its results. Its findings, rather.
We have got some of these polls up because some of you might be thinking, oh, you're saying Keir Starmer's doing really bad in the polls. He's doing much better than what Jeremy Corbyn was in the tail end of his leadership. That's true. But when you look at directions, and especially directions immediately since the Jeremy Corbyn controversy with him being readmitted and then having the whip suspended, they're going in the wrong direction for Labour. So this was a poll released by YouGov today. Westminster voting intention, the Conservatives on 38, Labour on 37, and that's Labour down 3 points in a week. And what it looks like is that 3% of voters are going to the Lib Dems and the Greens. So that could quite easily be people who were sort of offended by Keir Starmer's treatment of Jeremy Corbyn, basically in putting up 2 fingers to the left and switching allegiance. Again, these are small numbers, but it's a signal.
Can I come out into that very quickly on the YouGov one? So look, can we just get that back up, please, folks? You've got the Brexit Party on 4. Let's just presume that they're not going to get 4% in the next general election because we'll have left the European Union. Also, if you click that document there on the Britain Elects Twitter, on that tweet, it basically shows the number of Tory voters from 2019 switching to Labour. I think it's 5 in 100. It's tiny. And then you've got, I think, 2 in 100 are switching Labour to the Tories. Who the hell are these people? But in any case, after 60,000 deaths, the number of Tory Labour switches, which we were told Starmer would really get these people, is tiny. It's within the margin of error of 0. So Labour is still behind the Tories, despite the fact the Lib Dems are 5% lower than they were. Bear in mind they got 12% in December 2019. So It's really bad. He's had a very bad first 6 months of his leadership, despite the media wearing the kid gloves.
I'd say he's had a mixed 6 months in terms of electorally, because
I think you said, well, in the context of COVID.
but it's going in the wrong direction now. Yeah, in the context of COVID. Right. So let's look at the opinion poll. So this was out yesterday. So this is changes from the 2nd of November. The Conservatives are on 41%. That's up 3. Labour on 38%. That's down 4. The Lib Dems down 1, and the Greens up 1. So again, you're seeing over the same period of time, Labour down 4 points, very similar to the YouGov poll. That support going to different parties compared to the YouGov poll. But anyway, just giving you quite a clear picture. And we can go back to YouGov because this sort of broke it down as to why this is happening. And it does seem to be changing attitudes towards Keir Starmer. Sorry, this is actually from Opinion. Can we get this up? Graphic 23. So Boris Johnson approval ratings. So Boris Johnson is up 1. Over the past couple of weeks. Keir Starmer, still, as I say, he's in positive territory. He's plus 11, so I don't think we can say, in terms of polling, it's been a disastrous 6 months for him. But it does seem like it's been a disastrous 2 weeks for him. And what has happened in those 2 weeks? He's suspended the whip from Jeremy Corbyn, stood up on television and said the guy who I asked to be Prime Minister last year is actually a terrible person. He needs to apologise. 60,000 people have died, and he's up there saying this person needs to delete their Facebook post and wholeheartedly apologise. I'm not surprised people see this guy as shifty and kind of not interested in the things they're interested in. And that will be, you can get a pretty decent swing away from Labour just with people who really like Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, what sort of centrists will always say is, Jeremy Corbyn wasn't that popular in the country. And by the end of his leadership, he wasn't. But there are 10 to 20% of the population who are really committed to Jeremy Corbyn and don't really take kindly to a leader of what's supposed to be a progressive party putting 2 fingers up at him. So if Keir Starmer wants to make it the defining issue of his leadership, whether or not you have respect for Jeremy Corbyn and want him to be humiliated, which is essentially what Keir Starmer seems to be trying to do, then that doesn't seem to me to be a wise electoral strategy. Our final poll for you, this is from Opinion again. It has got which of the following people do you think would be the best Prime Minister? Again, almost neck and neck, 31-30 within the margin of error, but Keir Starmer down 3 points since when that poll was last done. So the direction is all the same. This row about Jeremy Corbyn not benefiting Keir Starmer. Maybe he should have done the sensible thing, which is to say, I may disagree with what he said, but obviously this isn't a disciplinary matter. We would not be talking about this still. This crisis is one of Keir Starmer's own making. If he had said, when Jeremy Corbyn made that statement, I don't agree with the statement, but he's not in my shadow cabinet, so there's not much I can do. This isn't a disciplinary matter, then we would not be here. Labour would probably be up in the polls, right, given the past 2 weeks that the Conservatives have had.
There was a Comrades poll, I think, out as well last week. And it really just, do you think Labour is united? Do you think the Tories are united? Now, clearly, for a very long time, people generally think that the Tories are more united than Labour, even though that wasn't necessarily true, for instance, during the withdrawal agreement stuff. When Starmer replaces Corbyn, that narrows and narrows and narrows and narrows. And I think it was in single digits, that difference, about a month ago. He'd done really well, like you say, in terms of at least giving that veneer of a united party. That has collapsed. That has completely collapsed. He did that. Now, one can argue there's been no policy from Labour this year. The Tories in the last 7 days have announced more policy than Labour in the last 7 months, precisely to create a general kind of detoxifying image and to basically say, look, we're not always at each other's throats. And he's just thrown that away for this one thing, and it's really hitting him hard. And maybe you're going to talk about the Alex Nunn's tweet, but I think that's sort of...
No, you go.
Yeah, so, he's then there's these reports that he's kind of incensed that Alex Nunn's saying, who's the former speechwriter for Jeremy Corbyn, tweeting negatively about him. And you think, my God, Jeremy Corbyn had to put up with the entire media against him. This is one guy with like 10,000 Twitter followers providing a thread whereby you've been entirely inconsistent on the HRC's findings, and he's upset. We'll see. But I do think, Michael, I mean, we probably do disagree about this. Somebody coming in, former Director of Public Prosecutions, £700,000 campaign from the most expensive leadership campaign in the history of British politics. I think his first 6 months have been incredibly underwhelming in that context. He is not Tony Blair Mark II. That is not what he is. That is not what his leadership is going to look like. Could Labour form the next government? Perhaps. Who knows? but it's not going to be easy. And I think a lot of people backing Starmer thought this was going to be right. Keir Starmer's at the wheel, Labour, 10 Downing Street, 2024, here we come. It's not going to be like that. And the last month in particular has been marked by unnecessary self-defeating measures like suspending Jeremy Corbyn.
I think we can get a couple more polls up. We can get up the one that you were talking about. Do you think Labour is divided? So we can see the polling figures here. And yes, that rockets the moment that Jeremy Corbyn is suspended from the party, which basically provokes a civil war, and will continue to do so long as he is not fully reinstated. And in the sense of getting the Labour whip back, that will remain like that. And people don't want to vote for divided parties. Partly, people don't really care about. My theory about this, people say people don't vote for divided parties. Now you ask people don't really care if a party is divided or not. So Boris Johnson kicking out 20 of his MPs, they didn't really care about. I think more what they care about is people talking about their own party. So the division, if you're super cutthroat and you just kick them out, especially if it's people like Amber Rudd who don't really have a following. I think if you just kick out Jeremy Corbyn, probably you would have the danger that there are a lot more people committed to him than are committed to Amber Rudd. I'm using her as an example because the whip was withdrawn from her by Boris Johnson. It didn't seem to have much effect. But I think what really damages you in the polls is that there's a national crisis going on, and all you're talking about is whether or not someone in your own party can have the whip because of something they said on Facebook. That's what people don't like. It's the sort of the navel gazing of it all. We can also get up one more poll. I think this is approval of Keir Starmer over time. So as I said, I don't really think we can say his year has been disastrous because opposition leaders.
I didn't say disastrous. I think he's had a bad
opposition
year.
leaders don't often, get in positives.
60,000 people have died.
Yeah, but you can see a direction of travel there, which is that approval is rising. So it seems like there are people who are getting to know him, and it's going up. Disapproval is rising. Sorry, yeah, disapproval is rising. We're going to end there. Any final thoughts, Aaron?
No, I want to make clear, I don't think he's had an appalling year. I don't think he's had the year from hell. I think expectations were high. That's obviously, nobody ever wants those, actually. Generally, they're a bad thing. But I do think he's had an underwhelming year. And I think if the next 6 months are underwhelming, if they have a bad set of local elections in May, I do think people will start to ask questions. That doesn't mean he'll go. People turn things around all the time. But for me, Starmer's approach here is basically what Osborne and Cameron try and do after 2005, which is to say you have a successful government. We're going to basically do everything you do, and that'll make us look like a credible government in waiting. The point is, Blair and Brown were actually effective politicians. And right now, Starmer and Labour are mirroring a party which is in complete disarray and completely unable to manage both Brexit and COVID. So it feels like they're going to have to come up with a new strategy quite soon. Otherwise, this could start to look quite bad. And I agree with you. I'm being critical because I'm a critic. But I think many people would have expected him to be doing better.
We are going to read a couple of super chats. First, though, we don't usually do this. I'm going to read out a handwritten letter from Nigel Potter, who is in Honduras. We always say we welcome super chats. We welcome you to go to novaramedia.com/support. But also, if you want to write us a letter and give us a check, that's also very welcome. It says, Dear Michael, Ash and Aaron, I think the Tysky Sour team with guests are great. You have wit as well as wisdom. Will James Butler be returning with the burner? We're hoping James Butler will be returning with the burner, but the burner burnt out James Butler. Daily podcast is a hell of a lot of work, so probably we need a bigger staff team before that can come back over any long, sustainable period of time. And yeah, very lovely letter. I won't read it all to you, but thank you so much, Nigel Potter. A couple of super chats from you. Chris Norton with a tenner. Just wanted to thank you all for the excellent show. Thank you so much, Chris Norton. Cameron Barnett with a $5. Congrats on 100k. It's very unlikely it'll be Starmer versus Johnson in the next general election. How do you think Starmer would do against Hunt? Interesting. Interesting to suggest Hunt when everyone is suggesting Rishi Sunak. Hunt and Keir Starmer, God, that would be boring, wouldn't it? Can you imagine the debate between Hunt and Keir Starmer? Very similar. Be a bit like the 2015 general election where you had, the 2015 one, where you've got Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg and David Cameron, and everyone just looks so fucking similar that you can't.
But Cameron was actually a nasty bastard, whereas...
Well, Hunt's rescued his reputation during this pandemic because he's actually quite good at asking questions.
Matt Hancock versus, Matt Hancock, which is a perennial kidnap victim, versus Keir Starmer, who constantly looks like he's on the toilet trying to have a poo.
Well, they both look a bit like they both shat themselves in a way. This isn't to I'm not taking the piss out of incontinent people. I'm just saying both of them look a bit scared when they speak. No hard feelings. We'll be back on Wednesday for Tysky Sour. Aaron will be putting out an interview tomorrow at Tuesday, which is tomorrow. Just 7 p.m.
Yeah.
What I do want to shout out for, though, is because we got 100k subscribers, thank you again. And we'll be doing a special Q&A live stream, Ask Me Anything live stream this Saturday evening. If you want to put in some questions, they can be about anything. They don't have to be about the news of that week. Go over to our Instagram, and we will be taking questions from Instagram for this one. Follow us on Instagram, and then give us your questions, I assume. I'll do a better shout out for this on Wednesday when I'm better briefed. I was very busy looking at everything that's going on with coronavirus.
I think you've done a great job. Come on.
Anyway, Aaron Bastani, it's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, Michael. It's been my pleasure to be with the man, the enigma, one half of Team Fox and Michael Walker, who've been so critical to Novara's success on YouTube in 2020. Long may it continue.
I wouldn't say, I think enigma, I mean, I'm quite open.
I think you're quite enigmatic. Don't sell yourself short.
You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.